Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Chelsea brings to us both stories of having big babies. She prepared well for both and got her partner on board by doing the Transform Your Birth course. She also experienced incredibly skilled caregivers, which meant even when her first son needed help with forceps, she was able to remain calm and experience no tearing. There's loads of wisdom in this story, so it's well worth a listen.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Welcome everybody for another episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast. With me today is beautiful Chels, and
Hello.
I've been with Chels through a couple of her babies, which is always lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got little Ambrose with her, who's 3 months old at the moment, little Brody we call him. So if
That's
you hear
right.
baby noises, just celebrate that because we keep it real on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But Chelsea, I always love having people who've had two stories because every birth teaches you something. So do you want to start with your first son, who's now 2.5? How are you feeling about the idea of giving birth in your pregnancy, and what sort of prep did you do?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much for the opportunity for having me on the podcast. It's lovely to see you again.
Well, thank you.
Elroy is now 2.5. The prep that we did, goodness, it's taken me back. But the very first thing I did was actually read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth.
Oh.
I read that on the plane on the way back from the US. I was 21 weeks pregnant. This was my kind of, okay, I'm focusing on the baby now moment.
Yeah.
Read that, and while I thought that it was really my first foray into could I possibly do this in a low intervention environment, and I think I read that book, thought it was very inspiring, and said, maybe it's still not for me though.
Yeah,
it was wonderful. Obviously, I'm looking at this now with the lens of 3 years, goodness. But it did pique that curiosity in me because I'd been fed the narrative that I know you've spoken about plenty of times, that was just take the drugs, right? Like you don't need to do it that way. Just have the drugs. And it was the first time where I kind of went, well, maybe I could do it without the drugs. All things going well. And so then when we got back to Canberra, we did your course, my husband and I came and did your course, and that was life-changing, I have to say, because I remember coming back after that course, my mum, who had been pushing the drug narrative for quite a while, said to me, so what do you think? And I turned around to her and I said, I don't want you to change my mind on this. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to try to do it as low intervention as possible. I understand all the risks. I understand what could possibly happen. But do not try to talk me out of this, because I've got my little ball of confidence now that I actually could do it.
Wow.
Do not talk me out of it. So that was really powerful that came out of your course, was actually the way to manage other people trying to change my mind.
Look, I do talk about this a lot. I believe most of the time we don't need them, but that's not what we get told as women. Every second person will say, I've got one bit of advice for you, have the drugs.
Yes.
And you're right about that confidence piece, because what that's saying, the message under the message is you're not enough to handle this. And I always like to point out, if you think of all of the women who've given birth since the beginning of time, long before those drugs were ever invented, don't tell me we can't do it. We always have. And the reason for that is we actually have drugs in our own body. called
Mhm.
endorphins. So yeah, we
Mhm.
want to milk those mothers because they actually do support us to help labour to feel more manageable. Can you recall, Chels, what it was in that process through the course that helped flip the switch for you on that? Or maybe it was just the whole process. What can you recall?
There was one particular moment in your course where we did a guided relaxation where you get us to envisage ourselves in the future.
Yeah.
And that was like, I know this sounds really airy-fairy, but that was absolutely transformative because suddenly I saw myself holding a baby and I had never once considered that moment. And it was me who had made it through the whole process, looking at myself holding this baby and just the elation that came with that. That was absolutely the pivotal moment. Oh yes, Brody, I know, honey. And yeah, I walked out of that. Like, I didn't walk, we obviously were sitting down, but right after we finished that meditation, I was like, I can do it. I can do it. Hang on one second. Let me just.
So that's the subconscious. Yeah, that's the subconscious saying, okay, I can see a path forward here.
Yes.
Now, our subconscious is wired to pick up on fears. And so when we get all these negative messaging around birth and what women can and can't do, God, don't get me started on that. When the subconscious sees the path forward and the conscious and the subconscious are very closely linked. When you can see the path forward of how to manage the process, then in terms of can I do it, starts to shift of, well, of course I can do it. This is doable. Yeah, that's
absolutely
really powerful. And what sort of impact did it have on your partner?
I think Nathan walked away from the whole thing, seeing me believe in myself, gave him a lot of confidence to trust me, I think, through the whole process. And we really saw that play out through Roy's birth and Brody's as well.
Yeah.
That he now understood that I could trust myself and my own instincts throughout the process.
Beautiful.
It was great.
You're both on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what unfolded for that first birth? How did that unfold?
Oh my goodness, the first one. I think one of the things I wanted to really highlight was that my first birth was quite complicated, and yet it still is one of the most euphoric memories that I have, and I love to revisit it. It is one of my favorite things to think about. But you know, it just didn't go the way that we planned. But it was still wonderful. So I went into labour with Roy sort of 6 o'clock in the evening after a nice walk. The contractions were coming every 15 minutes apart, but it was a textbook progression. It went from 15 to 10 to 5. So I think we ended up 1 o'clock in the morning, called the midwife. I was in the continuity program at the Canberra Hospital. And it was not actually my continuity midwife, it was her partner. And she said, look, 1 o'clock, nah, you're still talking to me, it's fine. You can wait. And then we called her back at 2 and said, no, really, I want to come in now. And so Nathan was doing the phone call. I actually I'd been quite active early on in the labour. I was having dinner, wandering around, but at some point time kind of went a bit weird. And I just have flashes of memory. So I remember standing in this one corner of my bedroom, just kind of rooted to the spot for quite a while, doing this rhythmic kind of stamping. And that was the only thing that I could think to do that would help. And I was stamping in the corner, and Nathan's like, she's kind of like, stop talking. Can we please come in? So let us get it. We came into the hospital about 3 a.m. And the midwife did an internal exam, and she said, you're only 2 centimetres dilated, which was quite disappointing for me because I had been 1 centimetre gone probably 4 days earlier. And I was like, you kidding me? I've been doing this for how long? And I'm 2 centimetres. But another thing that we learned from your course was I felt empowered at that time between 2-minute apart contractions to say to her, can you please just give me half an hour? Just give me half an hour, because she was trying to send me home. And I did not want to get back in the car. That you'll find that's a theme. I did not want to get back in the car to go home and then have to come back.
Particularly when you're having very intense contractions like that.
Yes. And they were 2 minutes apart.
Yeah, here's the thing about 2 centimetres. That's good progress because you've thinned out the cervix, and that takes a lot of contractions, particularly for a first-time birth, because your body's never done it before. So I like to make the point that labour doesn't start at 0 and go to 10. It starts before 0 in terms of the opening of the door of the cervix. So if you're, fully effaced and you're starting to dilate at 2 centimetres, that's wonderful progress. Yeah. And it can take a lot of contractions and a lot of intense contractions even to do that. But people fall into the trap of thinking, oh, it's not working, something's wrong, I'm not doing it right, or it's my fault. I mean, we can tend to internalise things as women. So you asked for more time. What happened?
I did, and to her credit, she gave me more time. My student midwife was there, and I think had a word to her that I was one of Tracy's women, and so she let me have more time. Yeah. And I took up this quite funny position where I had planted myself forward to the cupboard door in the birth centre, and just sort of like an A-frame, just pushing my forehead into the door, trying to stamp through contractions. And she said, "Okay, you can have half an hour. How about we switch to hip circles, because the stamping can be quite tiring. You've been doing it for quite some time now. Let's just, and it's also holding tension in your lower abdominals where we probably don't want it. So let's switch to hip circles." And I didn't love that at the time because it made it more intense, but I stuck to it. And to her credit, she gave me 2 hours. She didn't give me half an hour. She gave me 2 hours that for me felt like 3 contractions. Oh, honey. And so she checked me again at 5 a.m., so 2 hours later, and I was 5 centimetres. So she said, "Right, we can admit you now. You're allowed to stay. We're not sending you home. You're in active labour. No. Let's go." And at that point, I think 1 second. At that point, or sometime after that, I think I started. It got very, very intense. And at no point was I experiencing pain. For me, for that first, it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of very unusual sensations. It definitely wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't painful. But it did get to a point in that after the 5 a.m. check where I called Nathan over and I said, I would like the epidural now. I just want a break. Can you just give me like 10 minutes? I just need 10 minutes.
Give me a 10-minute epidural.
Just a 10-minute epidural, and then you can take it out and I'll keep going. I'll keep going. But I just, right now, I just need a break. And he, bless him, was just like, that's not how that works. If we do that now, that's it. And I remember thinking fine, I'm going to have to do it myself. And that's not the triumphant Rosie the Riveter that it sounds. No, it was actually kind of desperation. I was like, if no one is going to listen to me and give me these drugs, then I'm just going to have to do it, and I'm going to have to get through it. And within a few contractions, I was concentrating on other things. Oh, Ambrose, sweetheart, what's going on? So yeah, I remember by that stage, I think they suggested that I move to the toilet. Because I had been riveted to my forehead pressed against the cupboard position for a while. And I did a couple of contractions there, stood up and went, "Ooh," made some god-awful noise. I'd been quite quiet up until that point. And my midwife popped her head in and said, "What was wrong?" And I was like, "I think I need to push." And she's like, "Well, don't. Let's wait until the next one, see if you still need to push, and then after that we'll check." Because remember, this was at this point, this is 6 a.m. It's only been an hour since I was 5 centimetres. And when I said I think I need to push.
I'll just come in there, Chels. I'm just sorry. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I find this really fascinating. The need to push your head on the cupboard. Can you describe what that was actually doing for you? Because this is not an unusual occurrence in labour. Women, and I've often had theories about, sometimes as a doula, I used to put my hand on women's heads and put pressure on there. And it used to have quite a profound soothing effect on women, and with a cold washer it can be really nice. But I've often seen women do that and heard women talk about that. Can you recall what that was actually doing for you? I'm just a bit curious.
I think it's really interesting you say that, because everyone I've talked to just thinks I'm a bit bizarre. But it was I was able to put my full weight, I was leaning against my forehead. So I think the tense, the muscles down my neck, my back, everything was engaged. So potentially it was bit of a distraction. Like I had to focus on other muscles to be pushing against the wall. Not that I was doing it consciously. And I knew instinctively that I wanted to be leaning forward. We realized down the track that actually my son was rolling. Oh, thanks, mate. Was rolling to sunny side up during labor, which is the opposite of what you want them to do.
Right.
But I instinctively, I wanted to be leaning over, and I couldn't. Nothing was the right height in the room. Nothing was. Yeah. So I really wanted to be leaning. I wanted to be supported, and I found it. It was It was quite like I was in a trance by that stage.
I have a bit of a theory, and I have no idea whether this is right, but I sometimes wonder whether, because that's probably very much what babies experience in labour, is that same?
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether women doing that is part of that connection with the baby. It's
Quite
just
possibly.
a theory. Yeah. But the leaning forward is very, very typical. That's why women should not be stuck on beds. The desire to lean forward is often very strong, and the intelligence of the body and the whole system is something we can never take for granted. And so when you lean forward, you're bringing open your pelvis at a maximum, you're opening up the pelvic area and that pelvic cavity, and with the right pressures from the baby's head, supports the progress of labour. So, that's really interesting. So,
there you go.
Yeah, keep going. Sorry, I interrupted.
Where were we? Oh, yes. So I felt the need to push, waited a contraction. I mean, when I say I thought I felt like I needed to push, there was no questioning that sensation. But she checked me after the next one and goes, "You're 10 centimeters. Like, you ready to go. Like, that was very, very quick." Which I was kind of like, oh, thank God. So we moved onto the bed. I was on sort of all fours, leaning on a cushion. And by that stage, my continuity midwife actually came in on her day off. So she'd come in at 6 a.m. to be there. So I had my continuity midwife, her partner, and my student, plus my husband. And it was such a supportive environment. She came in and put her face right near my face, and was like, "I'm here. You're doing so well. You know, we're going to have this baby soon. Like you're doing beautifully." And I just remember this wave of calm, and I was like, wait, this is great. This is great. Pushing felt great. I was like, we're so close. And then I think probably half an hour into it, I turned to her and I said, "Have I made it through transition?" And she went, "Yes." What? So I was like, oh wow, I did it. And this, sort of separately in the sidelines, I was talking to my husband. They said, "Look, we're going to have this baby in about half an hour. You know, so get ready because he's coming." And then 2 hours later, I was still pushing, and he was not moving. He had decided that where he was good, and that was I was starting to become aware that they were having more and more side chats with Nathan about what was going on, but I felt fine. I was happy. Just going with the urges that I felt. And so I think at about 2.5 hours, they said, "Right, we're going to have to give you a bit of help now." It's been 2.5 hours. He's fine. His heart rate is fine. Yeah. He's actually not really having many decelerations, but it's been a little while now. So I said to my midwife, "Okay, if we're going to start the Synto, I want it started on the lowest possible dose, the bare minimum, please." And she said, "Yeah, absolutely. We'll start you on the lowest dose." So they moved me from the center to the suites.
Yeah. And
at that point, they then had me on my back, kind of propped up, but on my back on a bed, starting to put all the monitoring on, get the cannula in. And Nathan said, for him, it was a bit surreal because I was just lying there silent, a little bit of movement with a contraction, but just chilled out. And my student midwife also, bless her, I think it was one of her very first births. And she was like, "I wasn't really sure you're okay." But I was listening. I was just sort of sitting in my own head listening to everything that was going on. And because one little funny aside, I will get distracted here. Because she was a student, she kept having to ask where everything was. People would say, "Oh, can you go get a blah?" And she would go, "Oh, where is it?" And the answer was invariably in the storeroom. I'd heard this happen like 6 or 7 times during the course of the labour. And so while I'm lying there on the bed with the cannula in my arm, and she asks someone, "Where's the blah, blah, blah?" And I'm like, Clara, it's in the storeroom. And she looked at me and everyone in the room burst out laughing. And she said to me later, she's like, that's the point I knew that you were okay. Like, you were fine. You were just quietly in there.
Can
but,
I ask about that, Chelsea?
Yeah,
that's a really interesting message, I think, for those listening. When you know that something's not quite right and you're going to need a bit of help, one of the most powerful things a mother can do is stay really, really calm. This is a big part of what we teach in the Transform Your Birth course, because whilst you're calm, you are continuing to remain the best physiological version of yourself that you can be. And rather than going into fight flight, which is a natural response to fear and danger, we override that reflex. We override that to be really, really calm, because when we do that, we prevent the blood flow from going into your arms and legs, which is what happens when you're in fight flight, because you get supercharged to either take on the tiger or get out of there. And we keep the blood flow where it needs to be, which is with the baby and the uterus. And then, of course, that then also supports the activation of those performance-enhancing hormones. So were you aware or conscious of your need to stay calm in that moment? How did you anchor yourself in that moment, or was it just completely spontaneous?
I think it was, I'd done a lot of the meditations, but for me, I was really just sitting quiet in myself as an observer, and I knew that I needed to be calm, but also I did just feel this immense sense of calm, because I inherently knew that I was okay. Right. At this point, no one was doing anything to stress me out. Now things changed, but at that point I was like, you know what, I'm fine, and I need a bit of help, that's okay, but we're okay. We're just sitting and observing.
And you had a great team by the sounds of it too.
Incredible team. If I don't get to this later, I really need to say now that your student midwives, your partners, whoever you can build your support around you, they are so, so invaluable, because in that moment you just want those people there with you, knowing that they're in your corner makes such a difference.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
So
what ended up happening, darling?
So things started getting a bit quick from that point. I'd been on Synto for about half an hour. They brought in the OB who was on call, and I did not like her. Let's put it that way. The energy just changed in the room, and at one point she said to me, "Your contractions have slowed down." I remember thinking really spitefully, "It's because you're here." I didn't say it, but I was very much like, I can pinpoint that you were the reason that things have slowed down. I don't know.
Interesting. A new threat in the environment.
She was, and she came in and she was trying to direct me. She made me feel like I wasn't pushing the correct way. She was trying to coach me on a different way to push. And she kept saying things like, "It's not, we're not progressing. We need to get faster. We're going to have to do something about this." So I didn't like her. She might have just been having an off day, but that changed the environment. And then I remember at one point the surgeon came in and said to my husband, "Look, we're actually going to have to prepare to go out the sunroof now. I don't want to get a knife out. I don't want to. So we're going to try, if you're open to it, we're going to try with forceps. But if this doesn't go well, we need to be ready to do an emergency C-section. So I want to move her to theatre and have her prepped for a C-section if we can't get this baby out with forceps." And at that point, I think that, they sort of put forms in front of you, and I'm kind of going, really? Like signing stuff between contractions, and they're like, "Do you understand?" I'm like, no, I understand. I still felt quite calm. And once that particular doctor the problem one had left, I was like, you know what? We've got to do the right thing. And, I'd rather they know what they're doing. Let's get this baby out. And I won't lie that the prospect of actually getting some pain relief at that point, we've been going, I don't know what time this was, more than 12 hours later, was quite attractive. Once they said that I was gonna have it, I was like, oh, okay, that'll be nice. But they moved me down to theatre, and there was a bit of a snafu. They moved me because they were told the theatre was ready then and there, like, let go, otherwise we'll miss the window. And we got there and actually wasn't ready. So I was laboring for about 45 minutes in the kind of waiting area while you're waiting to go into surgery.
Mm.
Again, I was not stressed by this. If anything, like everyone else, I think was starting to get a little bit antsy, but I was not worried. I was kind of thinking at that point it was a little unfair. They were making me wait, but we were getting through it. And at one point, apparently some person waiting for surgery who'd been bumped, like told their nurse to tell my nurse to stop me making noise because it was throwing off their zen before their surgery. And I've never heard my midwife.
All the more reason to do it.
She was the sweetest, lovely, and she told that person where they could stick their zen because she was just like, she's having a baby.
I'll give you effing zen.
Exactly.
Whoa,
I was like, I love you so much.
That's walking on sacred ground right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hoping
but yeah, but we got in. They were getting me prepped for the spinal block. Unfortunately, there was some issue, and they actually had to have 6 goes at putting the spinal block in, and that was the point. I think was the only point at which I experienced pain. And I've spoken to you about this previously, but there was this moment where I was like, you know what, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. In my own mind, I was like, I'm not here anymore. And I went to my happy place that we'd practiced and we'd done in all of the relaxations. Yeah. And so for me, that was sitting on a swing near my grandma's house. And I just remember, like, with the best I could with my mind, like clinging onto that chain of that swing and smelling the hot tan bark and just clinging there for dear life, being like, I'm on this swing. I'm not doing this right now. I'm not in the theatre right now. I'm not having this experience. And it made all the difference. Oh, yeah. It was wonderful.
Those types of mind focusing techniques are very powerful because that's one of the beautiful things, even though we've got these complex minds that can get in the way of birth. One of the superpowers we have is to be able to redirect our minds to somewhere other than what we're experiencing. And people intuitively do this when they are experiencing a lot. Some people more likely to do it than others, but it is a very powerful tool to do that so that whatever's going on around you, you just do your best to anchor yourself to be calm and to use, to go to a happy place or a beautiful memory or focus on a word or image that really supports you to manage whatever's coming by your way. And I often say to people too, closing your eyes in situations like that can help because you're shutting down part one sense, and yes, you can hear, but if you take your focus and awareness somewhere else and allow the noise to just be noise, white noise in the background, then your system can adapt and pivot in a way that supports you to deal with that intensity. So this is a really, really good point that you're making, Chels. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I also on that, I instinctively had my eyes closed basically from before we got to hospital. So yes, that really worked for me to just shut out one potential source of distraction.
Exactly.
So that was gone. So once they finally got the spinal block in, Nathan came in and the surgeon said, right, we're gonna try with forceps, like, let's go. And then he's telling me to push and I'm going, I can't feel anything. I don't know if I'm pushing. What am I doing? But they did. They got him out with forceps. I didn't have any tearing or any cut, which I understand is not common, but was fine. I was very happy about that. And my husband, that was incredible. Very skilled surgeon.
That's the skill of a really good doctor. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where trainee doctors are working with us, and and I understand the need for them to build up their own skills, but don't be afraid to ask for the top dog.
Yes. Well, we didn't ask, and then there were. I mean, I think Nathan said he counted 18 people in the room because everyone had a trainee in there. Yeah. But no, we were that surgeon was phenomenal, and his presence and everything, he was wonderful.
And I suspect also your capacity to stay calm would have supported that as well. So
Possibly.
yes, it was a he. He was skilled,
Yes.
but at the same time, the fact that you were able to stay in a really good physiological state would have supported that as well, Chels. Don't underestimate your own contribution to that little outcome.
Thank you.
Mm.
But no, one of the things we'd said, we'd actually put in our birth wishes beforehand. The direct quote was, "If everything goes to hell in a handbasket, the one thing we want to hold on to is we don't know whether we're having a boy or a girl. We want Nathan to be able to tell me what we've had."
Oh,
that was the whole thing, and everyone was well versed on that. So when Nathan, like the surgeon said, "Dad, quick, come down here," and Nathan like grabbed Roy, my midwife was like, "Everyone, shush, Nathan, what have you had?" And so he was able to say, "It's a boy," and I have such vivid memories of that. I'd open my eyes, I could see my husband, I could see my son, and that like still makes me want to tear up. Like it was
I've got goosies too.
The most incredible experience. And I was really pleased everyone worked together so we could have that moment, even though this was not the birth we planned. To be able to still have that moment made the absolute world of difference to us.
Wow. Gosh, there's so much in your story, Chels. That's just beautiful, because birth can get complex and we do need help sometimes. Our capacity to stay calm is the key to unlocking your potential in that space. And then you just put a decent dose of love and care and respect on top of that labouring woman where she feels held and respected. And just that little thing alone, please respect our wishes for Dad to tell me that, what we've had.
Yeah.
Like that has seared itself into your memory and you've anchored yourself, even though that would have been a very intense situation. It's just that little beautiful piece has been able to permeate all of the 18 people in the room and a totally different environment. You've been able to maintain that capacity to feel love, respected, cared for, and power to your team. What a great team of people you had around you.
They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really did make all the difference. Wow. So that was wonderful. And then, got fixed up and everything and he was perfect. And I remember, within 4 hours I was going, "Can we do that again? Like, I want to do that again." That was amazing. Despite everything, Nathan's going, maybe not.
Wow.
But it was, despite everything, I think that was the thing that I really wanted to point out was that despite all of that and really not being the birth we planned, it was still incredible.
Yeah.
It was still absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So that was a wonderful experience and a lovely memory. Yeah.
So let's go in now to your pregnancy with this little fellow.
With Brady. He's been being very vocal. Sorry about that.
No.
He's engaged. So my pregnancy with Brody, I think pregnancy was fine, but I think the fears started coming back in because the first time mums don't know what to expect, and second time plus kind of you do know. Yeah. And so that's a bit stressful. I think one thing we haven't even really talked about was the fact that Roy was 4.2 kilos. And because I'd had pregnancy care in the US for the first half, they had their model was different, and we were never told how big he was. We were never told that he was going to come out enormous. He had a 97 percentile head.
Wow.
And
well done for growing such a beautiful big baby.
Big boy, yeah.
That's a good thing.
He was great, but it meant that when I never was kind of distracted by, oh no, I'm going to have a massive baby, because we all just expected him to come out the same size as me at 6 pound 13.
Now, you see, that in itself, this is part of the problem with this monitoring. Well, for starters, you can't actually accurately predict. There is a margin of error that's quite significant when it can't remember what it is now, but when it comes to measuring the size of babies in utero. But it's that planting of the seed of, big baby business is the sort of thing that can cause mothers to clench up, resist going into labour, resist the process of labour, and then, of course, the pushing, they've gone in with oh my God, I'm having a big baby. Yeah. If you're having a big baby, congratulate yourself, because that means your baby's thriving in utero, and that's a really great start to life. Little babies are generally fine too, but, in fact, we worry more about babies not growing than growing too big.
Exactly.
But of course, your carers are always trying to manage risk, and they often do think out aloud and talk about these things in a way that's very, every day to them, but they don't necessarily understand the impact that can have on
Absolutely.
a pregnant woman. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
with number 2 then, was that a bit of an issue for you, Chelsea?
Well, it wasn't, I think, because I hadn't known the first time. So when Roy came out so enormous and, even though everything went a bit sideways, everything went well. Yeah. When they started trying to tell me that Ambrose was also going to be 97, 98%, also got a massive head, and then the radiographers would make that face at you and be like, oh, like there's a big baby. I know.
You don't have to have the baby. What are you worried about? For God's sakes, take your troubles somewhere else. Oh,
exactly. That's your hang up, not mine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was water off a duck's back, because I was like, I know I can do it. I've done it before. Yeah. So nice. I think
good response.
To the extent that one can, and I don't know, how possible it is, but one thing, you do ask people what advice you would give. I'd say either ask not to be told percentages, or just try to ignore them, because that's noise that you don't need. And if your carers are concerned, then they will obviously raise, issues of very large, very small babies. But otherwise, it can be so off. Yeah. And it just gets in your head. So I was kind of like, well, he's 97%. Like, he's got to be bigger than that to stress me out. But we did do a refresher with you, which was a great place to, I think, just voice some of those concerns and have a safe space for them to be held and address those before birth number 2.
Yeah.
And I think that really did make a difference, because I went in, I finally felt calm, with the last few weeks before Brody was born. But he was textbook. He was absolutely textbook compared to my first birth. Textbook. I had. If we want to launch into that,
please.
My waters broke spontaneously at 7:30 p.m. I was eating dinner with Roy and Nathan, my husband, and I sort of stood up and went, I think my waters broke. And Nathan goes, don't just stand there. Go do something about it.
You're dripping everywhere.
Yeah, what are you doing?
We're having dinner, Chelsea.
Yeah, I know. Like, come on. And so I called my midwife. I actually had the same midwife who delivered Roy. But she was not around this time. She was injured, so someone else called. No, someone else answered. And I said, look, just wanted to give you a heads up in case things get going tonight, you might want to go to bed early. And she goes, we're actually really busy. So she goes, one of the women I'm dealing with, she's also in labour tonight, and we just don't have anyone, and there's no rooms in the birth centre. So if you do go into labour tonight, you need to go, just don't call anyone, just come straight into the MAU, the maternity assessment unit.
Yeah.
They're helping us out with overflow tonight. And I turned around to Nathan and said, right, well, we are labouring at home for as long as possible, because I do not like the MAU. For people who haven't been there, it's kind of like an emergency room set up for pregnant women, like just chairs with curtains around them. And I said, right, well, we're staying at home for as long as possible. And that really activated one of Nathan's greatest fears, that we were going to have the baby at home, because he's like, right, no, Chelsea doesn't need any more reasons not to get in the car. But at that point I wasn't in labour.
Don't encourage her.
No, exactly. At that point I wasn't in labour, so it was fine. Contraction started about 9:30, and I didn't really tell Nathan because I didn't want him to stress, and I also thought that one of us should get some sleep. So he went to bed. I tried to go to bed, but by 1 o'clock in the morning I was sick of getting a contraction every 15 minutes, and it meant I couldn't sleep. So I jumped in the shower, and the change from laying down to standing up meant as soon as I was in the shower, they were coming every 2 minutes apart.
Wow.
So I stayed in the shower, thank God for infinity hot water. I stayed in the shower for about an hour. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was like, I probably should tell Nathan now. So I went and woke him up and said, all right, come on, like we're on. I don't want you to do anything. I just need you to be awake, which he, I'm sure, loved. And at this time I was really conscious. I was like, I want to be more active. I want to change positions. I want to make sure I go to the bathroom, which was something I hadn't done in my first labour. I want to make sure I'm drinking water, moving around. So I changed a few positions. The best one I found at that point, because I wanted to conserve energy, was I pushed my my pregnancy pillow into a big ball, and then I kind of lay on that, so it was supporting my stomach. And then every time I had a contraction, I'd come up onto all fours, sort of on the bed head, and do hip circles. And it meant that when the contraction was over, I could just collapse back onto the
beautiful
onto the bed and like get a little bit of rest in between.
Yeah.
Which made a big difference. And then, so I did that for maybe 2 hours. And then 4 o'clock in the morning, to quote Hamilton, 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time. I realized 3 things. Number 1, I really did not want to get in the car. Like the contractions were coming too hard and too fast. I did not want to get in that car.
And there's the signal you need to be in the car.
Yeah. Number 2 was, if I get to hospital, they could give me the epidural. Like I have to get in the car, but I could, like if I get there, then they could give me the epidural. I know, baby. And number 3, if I'm thinking about an epidural, it's probably time to get in the car. So that was literally like
transition behavior.
Exactly, instant. I was like, oh, we have to go. So got Nathan ready. My best friend came to look after my son. She made the drive very quickly to our house. We got to hospital about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I will never forgive Nathan for how quickly he took the corner coming around the sports field to the hospital because that made me chuck. And I maintain that was his driving, but he claims it was probably transition. So I need you to back me up on that.
Totally. It was 100%. Driving,
1,000%. But we got into hospital, and as I suspected, they sent me straight to MAU. Not to get into all the finer details, but it was a bit of a schmozzle in there. It was too hot. It was too bright. I mean, walking in and just sort of barking orders at people and being like, lights, like bed, like curtains. And they were trying to talk to me mid-contraction and asking me, and I was like, just stop. And so then my student midwife came, and I was like, oh, thank God. Again, this is the same student midwife we'd had first time. She was now a 3rd year. And she came in, and I was just like, thank God you are here. She made all the difference.
Yeah.
We knew that Ambrose was OP at the time. We knew he was sunny side up.
He's rotated around, yeah.
Yeah, and my student midwife, bless her, she just said, you put your knee up on the bed. Like, so I was standing kind of next to this chair. She goes, put your knee up and see how we go. And she said to my husband that she's like, then she kept checking my stomach, and you could track the baby, like you could track Ambrose rolling over in the course of contraction. She was like, he's front on, he's side on, he's directly side on, like he rolled in the space of half an hour. And I said to her later, I'm like, thank God for trusting your instincts, because I would never have done that.
Yeah.
But we did, and it worked. Oh, honey. Yeah. Let me just stand up now.
Sure.
I'm glad. Sorry about that. So at one point I remember saying to my student midwife, I'm not getting a break. It's not stopping. And she felt my stomach for a bit, and she goes, well, it's because he's at the time OP. You're getting coupling, which is something I never really knew about, but your contraction kind of peaks and then it doesn't go away, and then it peaks again and drops off. And that was unusual. I think the sensations were much more intense this time with Brody, and I blame the fact that my waters are broken. So there was no real cushioning, but who knows, right?
That's true. No, it does tend to bring babies down more severely on the cervix. So when your waters break at the beginning, it can really kick your contractions into a bigger gear.
They were definitely coming hard and fast. But so Tara had determined that, Brody had rolled appropriately this time. And one of the midwives, I felt the need to push. I suddenly got an involuntary push, and one of the MAU nurses came over and said, well, that tells me you're about 8 centimetres and we've got a bit of time. And I remember thinking at the time, like, what do you, like, number one, you've not checked me. I have not had any cervical checks this time. Number two, what? Like, just because of me needing to push, and also 8 centimetres, doesn't that mean I'm ready? Anyway, so they said, well, we've got finally a room's opened up in the birth centre. Do you want to go? And I said, well, yes. And they go, well, you've got to promise me you're not going to have a baby in the corridor. And I remember I opened my eyes, I looked straight at this woman and said, I can't promise you that. So then between the next contractions, we absolutely sprinted. My student midwife said she'd never seen a pregnant woman move that fast, because I knew I had, 90 seconds to get between MAU and the birth centre. They had 3 women.
That wouldn't help the process much. Oh, my God.
No, not at all. They had 3 women, 3 midwives coming with me in case the baby came in the corridor. But we did make it to the room. And I took up my now familiar forward on cupboard position because that was the only place I felt comfortable. I started running the bath. But Cara then, bless her, my student midwife, she's like, you wanted to change positions. Let's change positions. Let's move on to all fours on a ball. And they run the bath, but by the time they turned it off for me to get in, he was crowning.
Okay.
So I was on all fours. There was a moment where I was kind of like, I've torn, like I'm gone. Never mind. Like that's fine. We'll just get him out and we'll deal with the consequences later. I realized that that's actually just the ring of fire that they talk about because I hadn't. But I remember that moment of just being like, oh, well, like it is what it is. We will just get through this. But no, he popped out perfectly. They passed him up to me because I was on all fours. They passed him up to me on my chest. Nathan was able to tell me again that it was another little boy. And it was I just was looking at him going, hi, like you're here. So it was only 8 minutes of pushing, 4 contractions, and he arrived at 6:30 in the morning. So at hospital for all of an hour and a half.
Wow.
And there he was. Had a bit of complications with 3rd stage this time. But my placenta just wouldn't come out. So I ended up with a manual removal in the room. They got the OB on call to just come and help me out. But I remember that was a real stress for me before I was pregnant with Roy. I was very, very concerned about 3rd stage. But when it actually happened, it was all managed very well and I was not concerned and it didn't overly hurt and they just got it done. And I kind of at the time was like, get it out, right? Like, I want you to be away from me so I can enjoy this little guy.
Yeah.
And they got it all sorted.
Chelsea, you've raised so many good things about, so many elements that can sabotage a woman's belief in herself, from big baby to progress to the environment and there's so many things that can cause women to go to have their emotional and mental state sabotaged. So as you look at your 2 stories, what do you think were the things that you were able to bring to the party that made the biggest difference to you getting through those tricky parts, even with the placenta that you just talked about, to get through those tricky parts in such a powerful way? Because you're actually quite delighted by both birth stories.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think actually just on that point, I would say that of the 2, Elroy's is my preferred memory. I'm still processing. He's only been 3 months with Brody, but the more complicated is still my favourite experience of the 2, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
But I think I really wanted to stay in. I'm a runner. I do long distance running, and for me, whenever things get hard in running, my mantra in my head is stay out, like keep focusing outwards. Don't think about internal. Right. But just to keep distracted from what's going on. But actually I think I really lent into it both times and stayed in. Right. And for me that made a world of difference because I was like, I'm not going to get distracted by anything else outside. I know I've got it in here. And that was huge, I think.
How did you know you had it in there?
Well, the first time I didn't. Know, but I think I by virtue of the practices and the work that I'd done, I learned that I had it in. So the second time I really relied on the fact that I'd done it once before. Yes. I knew that I had it in me and I could do it. Yeah. And that was I also, and helpful or not, with Brody's birth, I had in my head that it was going to get worse than this. I was like, it's going to get much worse than this. So even when I was, pushing, I was like, no, we're not done. Like, it can't be done yet. It's going to get worse than this, surely. So in a roundabout way, that was actually kind of healthy because the whole time I was like, no, we've got time.
I can manage this. Yeah,
I can manage this. It's going to get worse, so it's fine. Right now, it's fine.
Yeah.
But just staying in.
Yeah. And this inward thing is really where the key is. It's going inward. It's discovering that we're so much more than what we think we are. And we're not used to, in our world, really cultivating a relationship with our inner world, our inner resources, our inner quiet. There's sometimes, and people listening might relate to this, there are times, even when you're in really difficult situations, sometimes you can tune in and get a feeling of, no, this is going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I think women, I think the whole birth process actually is geared towards taking women inward, because the cortex goes offline. And so we become more primal, more inward, and more aware of our inner self. Can you tell me, because the practices are very much designed to work with your inner self, can you connect doing the practices to perhaps, like, what sort of impact do you think they had on your ability to do this?
I think,
or it might have just been intuitive.
Right. Look, I mean, partially yes, because if you do something enough, then you kind of incorporate it into yourself, right? So that it becomes intuitive,
automatic.
But I think you're right. It's that practice of actually being still. And for me, having done a lot of things that are sort of mindless activity, running very long distance can be quite mindless sometimes. So getting lost in yourself can be, I think that really helps, as it wasn't an unfamiliar position for me to be in mentally. Like I was kind of like, okay, we're here. And I think the practices really reinforce the comfort of going internal.
Yeah.
And also we listened during Brody's birth, we listened to your birth dance recording, which we hadn't done with Roy. And it was actually a really nice reminder, because anytime I sort of found myself drifting off, then your voice would come back in and just say something. I'm like, right, okay, back in here. Like back, don't worry about that, back in here.
Yeah.
And just kept me on track, I think.
I always say to the people I work with, the practices are where, like, it's great to get information. Information is really, it's powerful and not just any information that helps you to understand the process is the real sort of key, because when you understand the process and you know very clearly what your role is in the process, and you can anchor yourself to the simplicity, and it is simple, of your role, which is to be calm. Now, the practices are what really starts to help clean out the subconscious closet, which is to pull out any conflicting beliefs that you might have to you actually believing in yourself. They also give you the capacity to go into deeper and deeper states of relaxation. And they also give you an operating system, which is, I call it brainwashing, which in a positive way, because you're washing out the old stuff and you're planting in. And that labor dance track that I do is just background music with affirmations peppered all the way through it for about an hour. And that reconnects people to the teachings, the beliefs that we've been cultivating, and reinforces, and it's repetition that really starts to harness the superpower of the mind. And I always say birth is not a physical challenge, it is a mental challenge, and you've got to get your mind on board with what it is that you're doing. So, Chelsea, your story it's just so peppered full of such great wisdom in there, from, having two beautiful big boys, not tearing, which is always a good thing for women to hear if they've got big babies growing inside of them, to just, and even if you do tear, well, you heal, the body has a capacity to heal. But I love the fact that when things got complex, you were able to stay anchored to your sense of being calm. You took that into your second birth. You were able to really tap into those inner resources, that inner wisdom that we all have inside of us. And the role of the practices also can't be underestimated. And I have to have a shout out here for the skill of your care, including your student midwife, who was able to help you to turn your second baby around. So these are all some of the elements that really move the needle in birth. So is there anything you want to say to finish off, Chels? Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. This has been wonderful. I really hope that some people can find some comfort in what happened. The only thing that I wanted to add, which I know sometimes you ask people what people would recommend.
Yes.
One of the greatest things we did was we had our student midwife and our midwives during both births take photos just of what was happening. We left our phone out unlocked and they took photos. And I mean, even if, you can tell them to be as candid or as conservative as you want, but just to piece it together afterwards, it really helped with the birth debrief process, because I'd be like, oh, that happened before that. I thought that happened after, or I don't remember that. Yeah. And just to have, you can delete them. You can absolutely delete them, but just for my own mental processing, that was wonderful to have that record.
Yeah, so, I find that with women do need to integrate birth. It's a very intense experience, and it's the sort of thing that lives inside of you forever. You never forget your birth. No. And that the process of integrating it is part of what the mind spontaneously does, but it can really help if you've got things like photos, like you're describing, and also someone who can help debrief you, to help those parts that get a bit stuck sometimes, to find peace around them, or to look at what they're inviting you to learn as a result of your birth. I've been doing birth debriefing for over 20 years, and I've heard thousands of stories, and it never ceases to amaze me. It doesn't matter how shitty birth can be, there's always gold in there. When you go hunting, you can always see the gold, and the gold is what birth is inviting us to learn about ourselves. As women, we are far more than we give ourselves credit for, and birth is one of those little opportunities for us to discover that. And it doesn't matter the type of birth. It doesn't matter if you need help or not. It doesn't matter if it's a cesarean or a vaginal birth, drugs or no drugs. There's always learnings to be had in that process. So a big thank you to Chelsea and beautiful little Ambrose, who's been so very patient with us. He's been looking at me through the screen. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, because it's an inspiration for those listening. And have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
You too. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Chels. Thank you so much.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au? Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.